The sun has left and forgotten me. It's dark, I cannot see.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. Listeners, you've heard a lot about my journey to become a TEDx speaker in Washington, D.C. in November of 2025. And along that journey, I met some incredible people who have done things that I could never imagine doing, people who share a level of vulnerability that is just inspirational, not oversharing, but in a way that really makes you feel inspired and eager to continue the momentum of the work they're doing in whatever way we can in terms of support. So today, one of my guests today is one of the people that I met through the competition that I went through, and she was the People's Choice winner, which means that she was selected out of about 30 people ultimately to be the People's Choice speaker in November. Her name is Sharon Weinstein, and I hold a special place in my heart for Sharon, partly because she's a nurse, which is something my mom did for 30-something years, and also because when we met face to face, when she hugged me, I felt it to my toes. And listeners, when you have a hugger like that in your life, don't let them go. Sharon, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure, Sarah. Thank you so much. And I didn't realize that about the hug. I think that's very special. I'm glad to know, because you're right. When you get a good hug, you hold on to it for life.
Absolutely. And you feel it in that moment, and then when you think about it, you feel it all over again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Sharon, I always begin these conversations by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people don't know about them. And because you've done so many different things over the years, I think it's harder for people to pinpoint and anchor you in one part of your identity. But generally, people do that. They see one post, or they have one interaction, or they just watch the TED Talk, and they miss out on the complexity of who you are as a human being. So I ask that question so that our listeners get a feel for who you are outside of the primary discussion that we end up with. So what do you think? What can you share with us?
I played lady soccer. I was a late bloomer. I never learned to swim until my kids were born and I was 26 years old. I learned to play lady soccer at age 35. I had never done that. I had never participated in sports, and I played for 4 years in Texas and 4 years in Florida and had a ball, and then became a coach. So it was something that one would not expect someone to do, but it was great fun. And our team was the Golden Girls, mainly because we started it in Florida, and the least expensive shirts were deep yellow gold.
Ah, I love that. And you were older starting in a league than most women would have started in terms of being
Right.
athletes. So golden
Yes.
in that way as well, and
Right.
prized.
And Sarah, we played once in Texas against the under 19 girls from Trinity University, and they only needed a half a team to walk all over us.
I have to ask, there are two questions that popped into my head immediately when you talked about that. One is, what made you decide on soccer as opposed to some other potential sport or athletic endeavor that you decided you wanted to try? And the second question, we can come back to the questions, is what were you modeling for your kids, and were you thinking about it in that way?
That's interesting. So, first of all of our kids played sports. And it's one thing to stand on the sidelines and watch them and cheer them on. But many times when you're a parent and you're standing on the sidelines and cheering them on, you're telling them what to do, or you're coaching them along the way. And they're saying to you, leave me alone. If you're so good, why don't you do it? And eventually the message came through to a bunch of moms on the side. And on my team, almost everyone was a nurse or a doctor's wife. And my husband was the coach. And so we decided we would play and show them what we could do. None of us knew anything about it. The only one who knew how to play was Steve. And I believe that he hired someone who was a PE teacher to play sweeper, because she just seemed to be so good. She could just get the ball where it needed to be. One doctor's wife was totally hysterical. She would play center fullback, and all she had to do, because of her size, was shift her body and deflect the ball straight down the field. It was fun. It was great fun. We had a really, really good time.
Oh, I love it. And it was soccer because your children, at least one of your children, played soccer. So it
3 of
was,
them played
oh,
soccer. Yep, all
3
3.
of them. So it just made sense for you to do the sport that then you could
Yeah,
talk about with them and really understand when
exactly.
you're watching it.
Right.
Did you
I couldn't
watch?
see myself playing flag football, Sarah.
No.
That was not going to work. But
Well,
soccer,
my sister took up rugby as an adult.
ooh,
She played lacrosse in college and I think a little bit in high school and then took up rugby and her husband was a rugby player. I thought that was crazy. I love
that's a
it. So
tough sport.
it is. So soccer makes so much sense now that I know that 3 of your kids played it. So when you thought about it, you can look back now and know that
Yeah.
you were modeling something important for your kids. But at the time, is that something you were thinking about?
I think that's a great question. I was thinking about it. I was thinking about not necessarily modeling behavior, but leading by example. So it's probably another way of saying the same thing. I thought that if I could be part of a team with people I really didn't know, but yet create some sort of a team spirit that had us all working toward the same goal. And the goal was just show that we could do it. None of us were athletic. We were seriously the biggest klutzes on 2 feet, maybe 10 feet or whatever it was. We were just not really good at stuff like that. And yet we persevered. We showed up for every practice. We did those wind sprints. We did everything that was asked of us, even in pain, great pain many times for many of us. But we did it because we really wanted to be able to show them that, yes, we can do this. We're not just all hype. And if you said do it, we're doing it. We're going for it. So I did think from a standpoint of actually leading the way, if you will.
Mhm.
And although I could never be as good as they are, they're just natural athletes. And I was, as I said, the late bloomer. I think it was a lot of fun and an experience that I would not trade for anything. Plus, I was probably in the best shape of my life.
I was gonna say, I bet within a few months you started to feel really good about yourself.
Oh, I was firm, I was quick, I had energy, there was nothing that I couldn't do because of this level of energy that I had because he worked us all so hard. It was
That's
fun.
awesome. I love that. I love that on so many levels, especially because you tried something so new with that beginner's mindset. It didn't matter that you were experienced in so many other ways. You're a mom, you're an accomplished healthcare professional, you've done all these things, and then you show up on the field knowing that you don't know and
Oh yeah.
offering yourself an opportunity. Because a lot of people, they won't take something on as an adult that they're not sure they're going to be good at, or they're not sure that they'll have a natural inclination, and so they might not try it at all. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, the reason I asked you the question about your kids is that my mom was a teacher at first. She graduated with a teaching degree when my brother and I were toddlers. And my sister was born, we moved to Colorado, then we moved to California, then we moved back to Colorado. She had 3 teenagers at home when she went back to school because she said, "I've always wanted to be a baby nurse. I'm going back to school." And she
Wow.
graduated with her 4-year RN. It was a 2+2 program with the Pikes Peak Community College and the Colorado Health Sciences Center, and graduated summa cum laude with her RN. Yeah, with 3 teenagers at home.
Wow.
And I remember her studying because I was 15, 16. I took care of the household. My brother was off doing he was a high school senior when she was in school and so doing his own thing. And I was helping with my little sister and making meals. And um, what I remember is at the time being a little put out because I had all this responsibility that I wouldn't have had if she wasn't in school. But looking back, when I went back to school, when my boys were in 4th grade and 6th grade, I went for my MBA, and we were studying together at the dining room table. I had my laptop open, they had their school books open, and I remember this moment so vividly. Looking up, I'm trying to do my work, but they're asking me questions. You know, it's hard to do
Yeah.
homework when you're with your 4th grader and 6th grader trying to do their math homework. But I remember this moment, I had, like, that edge of frustration because I was trying to study or write a paper, and then I had this memory of my mom studying, and I
Oh, I love it.
realized that she had modeled this for me, that if that I could do this, that I wanted them to see what it looked like to work hard 15 years out of school, to go
Right.
back, to do something completely new, to commit yourself to more education and those sacrifices that it required. And I wanted them to see me doing that because I saw my mom doing it. So,
That's beautiful.
have you thought about or talked to your kids about your soccer days? And do you ever have conversations about that?
We do. We use those Storyworth books that we published, the two of us, and we've told all of the stories of our childhood. It's really kind of funny. Steve's was always, it was beautiful. It was a beautiful story. It was a beautiful life. And then there was mine. But yes, the soccer stories and the photos are in there. I'm intrigued by the fact that you went back to school because after my kids were born, I went back to school 10 years after my 3-year diploma to get a baccalaureate degree, and then went back
Mhm.
to school and did prerequisites for a master's, and then did a master's, and then went to the Kellogg School after that. And so I too sat at the table struggling with homework. I too, when I was ready to do the GMAT, asked my son at the time, I need to get 13 questions right, or the GRE, sorry. I had to get 13 math questions right to be able to get into school. How do I do them without doing the work? And he knew how to do that. He was a master test taker. And so my kids were coaching me through that process. I knew that I would nail the verbal part, but the math, it had been years, and I was
Right.
into metrics, not regular math. And so it was complicated. And when you struggle like that and they see you working on something while they're working, just like you experienced, it's an awesome experience because you're sharing something that is so meaningful that will contribute to all of your lives. It's very special.
It is. And you're making me want to ask our boys the next time I see them because they don't live at home now. Ask them what memories they have of that experience
Oh
when I
yeah.
was in school.
I recommend doing the whole book. The book thing is,
Yeah.
they each wrote us 100 questions, and we worked through those questions and reorganized them so that they would flow in the right order. But it was quite the experience to relive everything. It was interesting. And they each have a
Wow.
copy, and that's special.
And do they talk about those stories that you collected? Do they say
They
things
do
about
talk
them?
about those stories. The other night when we were having Passover, they were still talking about some of those stories
Do they share their
about
own perspective on it? Because we remember
uh
things so differently.
yes. And sometimes the biggest question that I get from them is, how did you ever come out of that household?
Mm.
How did you ever evolve into who you are and what you've become from that background? They say it to me all the time. Are you sure you weren't adopted? How did that happen? Why are the others not like you? Yeah, they
What are
say
the
it all the
odds,
time.
right? Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
the odds are against you. So that's actually a really good segue. But I still want to get back just a little bit to asking your kids' perspective of your stories, what they remember of things, because that's something that I want to do. And I've done in the past. I ask my boys every once in a while, what do you remember about our first trip to Europe when you were 8 and almost 11? What are your memories of it? Because I know what I remember of it. And so now you've put these stories together that include stories of them in relation to your life because they change your life and your identity shifts over time as your kids grow. So anyway, we can move past that, but that's where my brain is going. What are their perspectives of the way that you tell the story that involves them?
It's interesting because, of course, they have their own perspective. They're all so much smarter than I am. But when you start to listen to them and how they believe life should be, and a good example of that is when I was a little kid, we lived in two houses. One house until we got a fifth child, and then there wasn't enough room, and then we got a bigger house. And I will sometimes say things like, and halfway through the process, my aunt, who was divorced, and her son moved in with us. So we were back to really being cramped in terms of space, but that I
Mhm.
became very close to my cousin while he was living with us. At the time, he was only maybe 5 or so, and I was a couple of years older, but he stayed with us for almost 2 years. And I think what they thought was interesting was as they got older, they got to meet him and realize what a great guy he was. And we still remained close until he passed very recently. But I always had a special place in my heart for him. And they understand that I helped shape who he became. I think that the other thing that's kind of interesting is they'll laugh all the time. My husband has much more interesting stories than I do. He grew up in a very, very small town in Canada where everyone was basically related, I have to say, I think. There were
Yes.
26 people in his high school class, and I think half of them were his cousins. But he talks
Mhm.
sometimes about the farm girl, if you will. I never heard of a farm girl. So he'll say things like, well, the farm girl was there to warm your bed before you got in it. It was cold in Canada at night. And we were trying to figure out, well, does that mean she gets into the bed and warms it up with her body? Or does that mean she puts a heating pad on it or a hot water bottle? Or what does she do to make this bed warm? So when you look at their faces as they're trying to explore some of these things, it's worth $1 million. And then when your granddaughter is sitting in the same conversation listening and thinking, what? How could that possibly be? Why would you want someone to even sit on your bed and spread germs and do things like that? They have a totally different perspective of how things are. They're germaphobes and they've lived through
Right.
COVID. One of them had a COVID bar mitzvah. So they're very into the whole process of looking at things very differently than perhaps we did. But they
Mm.
understand when they all got a bike that I shared a bike with 4 other people.
Wow.
And they're
Yeah.
always asking me, well, was it a girl's bike or was it a boy's bike? And how did you decide
Right.
which one?
They
And
want
of
the
course, it was a girl's
details.
bike because there were
Right.
4 girls and 1 boy. And he had to just wing it with whatever he had to do to ride that bike. But they'll say, why weren't there more bikes? And did you not have any money? And didn't your parents like you? And you have to
Oof.
be honest and you have to tell the truth. And I do. They can't fathom that. They can't really understand a lived experience that basically changed my trajectory.
Right. And so
It's
different
different.
from theirs and so different from anyone they know because they're
Yeah.
in a different circle, a different social circle.
Yeah. With
So
people whose parents love and adore them and would do
right,
anything for them. It's different.
right. It is. So, this actually is a great segue into the book you recently published a few months ago, um, and also part of your TEDx talk
Yeah.
is wrapped up in that because you tell part of that story in the TEDx talk. So, when you were putting this book together, you said that it was going to be one thing. It ended up being something different. What is what made you decide that it was time to share this level of vulnerability about your upbringing and the struggles, challenges, abuse that you experienced?
That's a good question, Sarah. I used the 4W framework, and in my TED talk, I mentioned the fact that I've been using that technique my whole life. I just had no idea that it had a name. And when I realized that it was an entity, that it was a framework, I was really excited about that process. I had written 2 books called B is for Balance. The second one won all kinds of accolades, first place in consumer health. It was great. And the publisher asked me to write the 3rd edition, and I was ready to do it. I was probably 1/3 of the way through it by myself when we sat down and had a conference and said, gosh, I've been chasing balance my whole life, especially when I worked in Eastern Europe 100 hours a week, 3 countries a week. There was no such thing. So I wrote about balance, but I never really found it myself. I talked it, but I didn't walk it. And so partway
Typical.
through this edition, I said, what about the concept of harmony? Maybe if we have a little bit of harmony in our lives, we can be happier with what we do at work and at home. And things have shifted so much post pandemic that we need to think about it in a different way. And so to work on harmony by design, because it was called harmony by design, I used that same design thinking framework. I've been working in that space for a long time now, about 8 or 9 years, and lead groups. And I'm very excited about the work, but using this model of those 4 questions for every single aspect of harmony at life and at work and at home was fascinating. So I added 2 co-authors, a clinical psychologist and another nurse, and we went through the process. We related it mostly to healthcare, but if you're a new graduate, what should you be looking at? If you are starting your first job and it's not working out, how do you apply these questions? If you're mid-career and you want to advance in life, what do you do then? If you're post-career in what we call preferment in nursing, meaning you do what you want, with whom you want, when you want, on your terms, how would you approach it then? So where am I? What is my reality? What if I tried something different? What could I do given time, money, and resources? And then what works that I can wash, rinse, and repeat and do over and over again that is sustainable and will allow me to live my life to the best of my ability. When we put it that way, and we had 10 appendices, the publisher was so excited, Sarah, that they came back to me and said, "You have 2 weeks. Can you create an entire learning guide all around this? The 10 appendices are not enough."
Oh my
And so I
gosh.
needed to turn around and create another 125 pages that I did with major examples of how you could actually use this tool to shift your life, to shift your beliefs, your innate beliefs, the limiting beliefs that hold you back. And it's kind of neat, not
It
to relive
is.
things, but to acknowledge when we name it, we remove the hidden power. We stop carrying things silently. We begin to own our narrative. And that's exciting. That's our story.
It is. It's exactly why the stories matter so much. It's not the story itself, it's how you talk about it.
It is.
That's the name
Yeah.
of this podcast. Your stories don't define you, not the things that happen in your life, but how you tell them, how you talk about your stories really matters. So, what is one story that you share in the book that you think demonstrates well that process, that framework?
I like the stories that move beyond healthcare and into work in general, although they could relate to healthcare. And as part of the work that I do, I work a lot with pharma, med device, and life science companies. And I'm coaching what we refer to as rising stars, mostly female leaders who are between the ages of, say, 30 and 42, on a career trajectory, but not quite sure where it's going, not quite sure what they need to do to get to that next level. And so I like the use of the 4Ws in that framework because it allows them to see where they are now, what they need to do to increase their influence. And you don't need a title to have influence. You can have
Right.
influence with or without authority. You can
Mhm.
be the low totem pole in the room, but come up with the great idea that shifts the paradigm and spells success.
Right, or
So looking
or
at
be
things
the
with a
support
different lens.
person. Right, or be the
Exactly.
support person when you hear a good idea, being the cheerleader for that idea, you're
Yes.
influencing, right?
And then knowing that within this group, at least, it's a safe space, it's psychologically safe. There's an opportunity then to carry it forward and to get recognition for what you brought to the table. No one is
Mhm.
going to steal your great idea. They're going to celebrate you. So I think that celebrating those small wins, which for some are huge wins, to me is very exciting because I never had wins to celebrate as a kid. The other night we had during the Seder, my grandson and I celebrate our birthdays together. So his birthday is tomorrow and mine was last week. And when we were celebrating with this flourless, awful cake, I mentioned to him, I'd never had a birthday cake. I've celebrated now 16 birthdays with him. But I said, I never had a birthday cake. And he said, what? And I said, I never had a birthday party and I never had a birthday cake. And he found that to be so strange that you could go through life and no one ever celebrated the little things and all the difference in the world. But if you've never experienced them, they feel so foreign to you. So I've always made a big deal about celebrating my kids and my grandkids' birthdays. My son had the most custom cakes you've ever seen, Batman and Robin and the Lone Ranger and things. And
Mhm.
our daughters had amazing cakes. And it's always been something very special. It,
Mhm.
it just was. But I think that it related to the fact that I never had one. So I wanted to be part of that process. I wanted the cake to look really good. And I'll tell you, on the outside, this cake looked glorious. It was beautiful. It looked like it was caramel, but trust me,
Uh-huh.
it didn't taste like what it should have tasted
'Cause
like.
it
It
was
didn't taste like
no
cake.
flour.
No, it was, yeah, the flour was missing.
Yes,
The
well,
flour was
my
missing.
my favorite Passover birthday um, treat, dessert for my because my birthday often falls on Passover as well,
Yeah.
was when my husband made these um, nut crusts and then a special tart with fruit.
Ooh.
And yes, it was so delicious. It was almost like a cheesecake. There's no flour in it, and we couldn't have it right away because we were having brisket at dinner. And for our listeners, for if you are having a Jewish celebration that is within the practice of kashrut or being kosher, you don't mix milk and meat, so you can't have an ice cream dessert after you've had a meat dinner, unless you wait a few hours after. But anyway, back to one other dessert. My aunt, my grandmother's sister on my dad's side used to make this killer meringue and sponge cake with whipped cream and
Ooh,
strawberries for my birthday when it would fall on Passover. Anyway, back
that
to
sounds good.
it was
That
delicious.
sounds good. Yeah.
So back to the story. Um, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here because I think it's
Okay.
important to come back to the framework because of what you did with your TED Talk. How
Mhm.
did you use that framework to apply that to giving a TED? Because I remember the speech you made after you got the People's Choice Award, that this
Mhm.
was on your bucket list. You wanted to do it before your 80th birthday. And it had been on your bucket list. You had applied for a few different TEDx stages and hadn't been selected yet. How did you use this framework to get yourself onto that stage?
I, as you know, we started out with a different theme. You know, the
Right.
group that I was in started out with that global democracy theme, and
Mhm.
it didn't seem to fit. And yet I tried to apply this framework to it because that really was what I wanted to talk about.
Mhm.
I was really glad when the theme shifted because it definitely resonated with who I am and what I've done.
Mhm.
So I've learned this through my own lived experience, and I shared part of that journey in the TED Talk. This whole concept of think differently to be unstoppable. It was really personal. It was vulnerable, and yet the most important message wasn't the story itself. It was what came next, and that was where this simple shift came, separating the event from the identity. Something happened, it mattered, it shaped me, but it didn't determine my ceiling by any stretch. As a
Right.
matter of fact, it empowered me to do more. So in the talk, I share that lived experience that changed my trajectory, but it could have been the headline. It could have been the defining moment that people associated with me, but that wasn't the point. The point was what I chose to do afterward. And by
Mhm.
choosing to think differently and apply this model, I chose to move forward. I chose to become unstoppable, not because of what happened, but because I refused to let that moment define my future, to define my life.
Right. I loved that you demonstrated something that I talk about a lot in my podcast and my work as a coach, which is when you're telling a story that includes something devastating, tragic, significant abuse or trauma, that you you can't spend more than 20 or 30% of the time you have on the trauma itself. That has to be the shortest part of your talk. You have to set the stage with it and make people feel what you felt. And at the same time, the majority of that talk has to be about how you recovered from it and how you define success afterward. And that's what you did in your TED Talk that I found especially moving and inspiring because some people spend way too much time and energy talking about the struggle and the trauma, and that brings the energy to a place of grief,
Mhm.
which you can have for a short amount of time, but if you're trying to inspire people, you want to spend more of the time on the inspiration side of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think you claim the meaning because that's where you basically are transformed. Instead of saying,
Mhm.
gosh, why did this happen to me? Why me? Woe is me. We ask, what did this teach me? For me, the
Mhm.
lesson was courage, voice, advocacy, the realization that silence protects systems, not people, that insight shaped my work, my leadership, and my message. And so that's what takes you from a survivor to a strategist. Surviving is powerful, but
Mhm.
leading from that experience, that's transformational. It allows you to design change and to influence systems and to create space for others and carry them along. And so the talk was not about the past, it was about what becomes possible when you refuse to be defined by the past.
Exactly, exactly. I love it. So, as we come into your current situation, your current projects,
Mm,
um, totally inspiring that something I talk about a lot is how we stay relevant throughout our lives and that our kids feel like they need to be relevant. They need to know that what they're doing matters and that who they are matters and they're contributing in some way. Even our fur babies have to have a
Yeah.
job if you want them to behave well, whether that's as comfort to you or carrying something. We put a backpack on the dog that's a working dog or whatever. And as people get into their older years, making sure that you're continuing to find things that you can contribute to, that you can remain relevant in your positive contribution with intention. Because sometimes I've noticed that people who want to be relevant will sabotage things to try to fix things. And that's how they're demonstrating their relevance, which is, yeah, obviously not a great way to do it. So you mentioned before I hit record this project you're working on because April is it National Sexual Assault Awareness Month? Is that
Awareness
right?
month.
Yes, that's what I thought. So talk about this project that you started and then that you were brought back to contribute to in this anniversary year.
Yeah, thank you for that. When I lived in Chicago, I volunteered for the Zachariah Center for Sexual Assault. At the time, I was working at a medical school running the clinics and practice plan, and I saw that this was in the area. Wanted to become involved in the community more for networking than anything, and I joined the board of this organization that at the time was in a small walk-up in Waukegan, Illinois, famous only for Jack Benny, the Jack Benny Park, but nothing else. And
Okay.
so I went to the meeting and we helped to identify a potential CEO and we grew the business, if you will, and created a space that was 100% paid for, that was amazing through donations and more. It was fabulous. And I got to be able to work with the advocates and to become an advocate and to go to the hospital and to work with the sane nurses. I wrote a lot of manuscripts for them at the time. I did lots of work in that space and I became really intrigued by it. The only reason that I left the board was because I was working in Eastern Europe at the time, 2 weeks out of every month for 12 years. And I missed several meetings and I felt badly not giving 100% plus. So I
Right.
stayed on the periphery for a while. And then 11 years ago, I moved to the Maryland area to be closer to my kids and to see my grandkids grow. And what was interesting was last week I had the opportunity to present at the American Organization of Nurse Leaders in Chicago, a meeting of 5,500 nurses. It was amazing.
Wow. Mm.
After my presentation, I had made an appointment because I reached out and told them about my TED Talk to the Zachariah Center. And they invited me to their new facility in Skokie, Illinois, which was further south, closer to the airport, closer to the city. And I got to have a tour of that facility and to meet with the team. And it was an amazing experience. I felt as if they had grown so much, but so had I, and that they were creating an even bigger impact than I ever would have dreamt possible. It was just so overwhelming. And the facility that they created that mimicked the one that was in Gurnee, Illinois, further north, and the outreach that they've done and the work that they're doing is so powerful. And they talked about the events that they were having during the month of April. And I suggested that we partner on some of our posts and other things and see what we could do to really spread the word together. And so I developed a LinkedIn campaign for the entire month of April that ties them into every single experience and mentions them and promotes them. And that's exciting. I want them to continue to grow and to do amazing things. And we've already talked about me presenting at their next Take Back the Night event in May of
Mm.
27. So just to be involved, even on the periphery, is so exciting for me because I share their passion for what they're doing. It's
Right.
more important work than ever before. The numbers really don't lie, as I said in my TEDx.
Right.
They don't lie. And there are more people than ever before who need to at least increase awareness and to
Mhm.
become survivors rather than victims.
Right. And to teach the next generation what this looks
Absolutely.
like.
Yeah.
Right.
My granddaughter
So we could
talks about it
avoid
all
it
the
in the first
time.
place. Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Uh,
didn't mean to talk over you. My granddaughter, who's only 14,
mm.
when the TED Talk came out, she wrote on her Instagram account, best TED Talk ever. And I guarantee it, it's my grandma. I mean, she
Uh,
was so excited about the whole concept. She wanted people to understand that I felt comfortable talking about what I talked about
Mhm.
and that she and the people with whom she works and collaborates and learns and studies and plays and whatnot should also be free to talk about what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has to be a topic of conversation or you
Yeah,
don't teach the next generation so that
exactly.
we
We
don't
don't
have
pay it
to have
forward.
so many survivors and that have to get through that
Yeah,
survival. So when you think about this experience with the TED Talk and this experience recently with it's a Zachariah Center,
Yes.
um, what do you think about for if you were going to give a talk at their event next year, the Take Back the Night event? You've already talked about the framework, changing from surviving to thriving. What would you say during that talk that you think would be a different perspective, something that would, how do I put this? Something that other people really haven't addressed in the way that you could because of your history?
I think that I would talk about one or two things. One might be permission. So, using your voice to create impact. When we share intentionally, we create permission for others to rethink their own stories, permission to move forward, regardless of what your story is. Because the people who attend that event are not only former victims, permission to see yourself not as defined by adversity, but as strengthened by it. And so to rewrite or push forward. So when you reset, unfortunately, the other day I had to reset my phone and it's never been the same. It's totally whatever. But your next chapter isn't predetermined, it's designed. So every single decision that you make becomes part of a new narrative. It's one that's rooted in agency and purpose and in growth. And so my lived story is part of me. I can't make it go away. It shaped my perspective. It influenced my voice, but it doesn't define me. What defines me is what I've done with it, advocating for others, challenging silence, helping leaders to think differently. Because everyone's story matters. You're not your hardest moment. You're the choices that you make after that moment. And that's what I
Right.
think I'd like to talk about. You're the voice you claim, you're the
Right.
impact that you create. Your story informs you, it strengthens you, and in some strange way, it prepares you for the rest of your life.
You just reminded me of something I talked about on a post the other day about labels not necessarily being inherently bad. You earn the labels that you choose through your actions, your behavior. You want to be resilient, you have to demonstrate resilience. You want to be outdoorsy, you have to spend time outside. You want to be generous, you have to spend time giving generously, whether that's
Of your time.
volunteering, yeah, money, whatever that is. So I love that. You earn that by making a plan, by choosing to do things differently. The other question I have is, so I interviewed this wonderful artist, Anne Pleasance. She also lives on the East Coast, Northeast Coast, and she had been in an abusive relationship with her husband, somehow escaped. But when she was still with him, she was volunteering at a, a facility for women who have experienced or people who have experienced
Yeah.
domestic violence and abuse. And she didn't see herself in those victims. She was volunteering there because she felt like she could contribute. And it wasn't until later that she connected the dots because it wasn't physical abuse. And so she didn't see it as abuse. And she finally connected the dots that that was what she was experiencing as well. Did you ever have a moment like that where you were contributing without necessarily acknowledging your own connection?
I've not experienced that. I mean, always, in all the homes that we've built, because we lived on the East Coast a lot, all of our homes had basements. I couldn't walk down a basement set of steps. That brought back the trauma from childhood. There were things that when they happened, I thought about them and I related them back to the things that had happened, not just to me, but to us as a
Right.
family, to my siblings who still are in intense denial, always as if nothing ever happened.
Oh,
Or when they say that something happened, it's, I don't want to talk about it now. Well,
right.
if you didn't want to talk about it then, and you didn't want to talk about it later, and you don't want to talk about it now, there may not be a time in the future to talk about it. And it's sad for me because my kids have known from the time that they were very young as pre-teenagers what happened. They've known that they were never allowed to be with my parents alone for more than 30 seconds. They saw that I was respectful of my parents, even though I disliked them for what had happened to me. I was still the one of the five who paid attention when they were sick, who made sure that they got care, who did the things that you would do because you're a nurse, not necessarily because you're their daughter.
Right.
Because to me, it's a patient and you do what needs to be done for a patient. When I used to work in the ER and I had people who were criminals who came in and with police escorts and whatnot, I didn't not take care of them because of what they had done and who they were. Everyone deserves that same attention. And when you're in a caring position, it's a little bit different. But I always, I think, led by an example of showing respect, um, even though I disliked every single thing that had ever happened. But as I said, my kids knew early on, my grandkids knew early on. I had no problem telling them, and fortunately, their parents also had no problem with me telling them the story.
Right. What one thing that just popped into my head that is just so powerful is that your talking about it makes it okay for people to talk about it. Your kids and grandkids would never hide an experience like that from you because they know you've been there and that
Yeah,
you will support them and believe them. You will never doubt their honesty about what's happening to them.
exactly.
And if that's the I was immediately thinking about your siblings and how when they're not talking about it, they're not just doing a disservice to themselves and their story and to each other. They're also doing a disservice to everyone else who has ever suffered sexual harassment and abuse.
Yeah,
It's that silence. They're not protecting themselves, and they're certainly not protecting other victims or potential victims by not
exactly.
speaking up and making people aware that this happens all the time.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of like not talking about the Holocaust and pretending it didn't exist,
Right.
isn't it?
It is. It
By
is.
denying that it existed, does that make it go away? Or the Armenian genocide, does that make it go away? No.
Or
These things
Syrian
happen. They're part of
genocide or
history.
right.
Yeah.
It's still continuing to happen. And yeah, we can't just ignore it. It's human suffering and it's for the benefit of very few people. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I'm with you.
Okay.
Sharon, this has been such a pleasure as I knew it would. And I so appreciate your time, your vulnerability. Um, if you could leave our listeners with one thought, what would that be?
I think that it would be going back to that whole concept of thinking differently. When you choose to think differently, you truly can become unstoppable. It doesn't matter what happened to you or what life you've lived. You're the voice you claim.
Mm, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The pleasure was
Listeners,
mine. Thank you.
oh, absolutely. Listeners, it's your turn. I challenge you to watch and listen to Sharon's TEDx talk. You can search TEDxUStreetWomen for Sharon Weinstein. And you can check the YouTube channel on TEDx channel or TEDxUStreetWomen, all one word, and ask yourself how you can use this framework, the 4 Ws, to change the way you're thinking about something that's limiting you. I am a huge believer in surrounding yourself with people who will help you and support you and guide you to do the things you want to do, to change something in your life. If you are surrounding yourself with people who don't want you to change, don't want you to experience a different kind of life, are afraid of who you might become, then you might need to make that change first.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. I appreciate you.
You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.